Okay, so here let's look at a few different concepts. One of them is the term that I've used recently quite a bit, where I call like an impure perspective. So the problem with this is sometimes the absolutist falls in the trap of this, or somebody who's, again, just being objective, that you would not consider yourself credible, then it'll be projected like, oh, that just means you're not credible. Like, because you're aware of the nature of the process. So the person who's aware is to blame for the process, or they're responsible for the process. Everybody else can live in a fantasy and pretend like it's, so that's like this full of sound and fury signifying nothing. Somebody is just ignorant and doesn't think, so therefore everything is perfect, right? And it's not, but they just live in that fantasy, and it requires constant subversive means, like they have to distract themselves, they have to drink and smoke and stuff. So it would show you they're not really at peace with that state. That would indicate it's not absolute, but they'd rather keep up the illusion and just not think about it. So like, what's worse? Thinking about it and being uncomfortable with it, or having to not think and distract yourself in a subversive way? And again, people take comfort in the bread and circuses aspect, but that's an interesting dichotomy. So the other thing that I said is, so you could acknowledge that, like, human bias and flaws in the myopic perception, or you could deny it or not think about it. So that's where, again, society ends up being ruled by that, the full of sound and fury signifying nothing kind of thing, that the person who doesn't think and doesn't have that doubt or self-awareness will just insist upon their own interests. You see this a lot throughout history, right? People could just say anything with certainty and people will believe it, or so that's what people would honestly, that looks like a train track, that the way they've done that part of the road. You could just say anything and get away with it, right? And people will go along with it. So that kind of shows you right there the impure bias and perspective that people have, is like, they go with what looks good on the surface, what sounds good, what they want to hear, what they want to believe. Even like religion, I have that phrase from an old debate of mine that's really one of my favorites, which is talking about religion. You cannot dissuade with reason what came about by desire. That just came about kind of organically in a debate, and it's like, so in other words, people aren't believing it because it's true. So you can't use facts to disprove religion, because that's not why they believe it in the first place. 2,000 years ago, before we had modern science and knew even half of what we know now, people still believed it, right? People believed it in every era, anything. So they'll believe it just because they want to believe it. So it's not about the truth anyway. And then what happens with that is the fact that, it's that cognitive dissonance that should be healthy and common and embraced. Like, human beings are flawed. Our senses are myopic and limited. We can only perceive what's immediately in front of us and around us, right? So that's fine, right? That's not a criticism or saying, oh, that makes you stupid. But it would be stupid if you insist upon that, like, oh, you take the reality around you as absolute and don't question it and don't think about anything else. Like, as if, for example, the awareness of that process I'm just talking about, of your senses, would be used to curate reality around you and control you. Like, you don't think that the government or media or anybody would present to even ordinary other people. They're presenting to you what they want you to see. So now, is that really credible, or is it just like, oh, they'll dress a certain way because they want you to perceive them that way? That doesn't mean they are that way, right? Because anybody can dress. That's where the self-awareness is an issue. It's one thing with nature, although even that I've said, like, even nature will try to deceive you, right? With camouflage or certain things that seem harmless that are deadly, and vice versa, right? Like a mosquito could be deadlier than a tiger because of the West Nile thing or whatever. So the point is, even then, there's a deceptive element. But especially with people, you don't think that there's some intentionality to it. Like, people go through such lengths to try to create their appearance. This is part of my superficiality protest talk that I had episode years ago. Like, basically, they'll go through so much effort, right? Let's use women. Okay, I'll pick on women briefly. Like, oh, they'll get ready in the morning for 4 hours and do their hair and do their makeup and do their nails and do all this. Like, I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing. You can do whatever you want. But then they'll act all innocent sometimes, like, oh, somebody's checking me out, somebody's looking at me. It's like, you put in a lot of effort into your looks, so, like, evidently you didn't have to do that. Okay, don't wear any makeup, don't wear any, just don't care about your looks, and then people won't define you by them as much, at least. I know to some extent that can't be helped, but You know what I mean? Like the amount that you put into it kind of comes back a little bit, because I always use that example. Like, oh, let's say I have a friend who dresses all professional and stuff, and not even like conservative. They just don't care about their looks. They wouldn't wear makeup to work, and they, wear professional clothes. They weren't looked at as much for their looks because they didn't focus on them as much themselves. So that's an element of it. And then the other side of that superficiality is the fact that in general, people can have self-awareness. And when you have self-awareness, what does that lead to? It means that the same way that you are you're perceiving on an initial basis, like you see what you see, or you perceive with your senses, and you take that at face value, right? So like how somebody looks, you're like, oh, this guy looks really rugged and beat up and like, messy and stuff, right? So you'll judge them based on that. But I'm trying to think of how exactly I explain this. Hang on. Oh, what is this, dude? What is this? Okay. All right, what I'm saying is somebody looks very bad on the surface, but it could be like rugged and dirty or whatever. But it's because they've been working and slaving away really hard, and they're doing it to help people who are starving, and they're exerting themselves, right? The absolutist way of that. It's like they're sacrificing appearances for actually something that matters, right? And they're not vain, and they're not superficial, and they respect other people's intelligence, and they can be aware of the nature of the process, that appearances don't really matter. Versus, the person who looks good, they put in all this effort, right, to keep up appearances. It's almost like they have to hide something. It's almost like they have to overcompensate for something, right? So that's the deceptive duality of it. Again, when you have that self-awareness, that kind of hurts the argument that you take everything at face value, but the people, other people, especially in position of power, they're putting a lot of thought into it. Like if you could only see one of these marketing I've been in some of these like advertisement think tank brainstorm type meetings, how cynical people are there, right? But you take it at face value, so you're kind of doing them a favor. You'll take it at face value and you'll be controlled by it, but they certainly are thinking very deeply about it, right? And thinking about how to control you and so on and so on. So it's just weird, because it's like you're aware of the initial perception around you with your senses, right? So you take it at face value. I can't blame you for doing that, but then the amount of thought put in to curate the reality around you between government, media, etc., is easily able to control you then, because they'll just show you what you want to see, and then that's all it takes. And could be World War II Germany, could be Russia, could be China, could be anywhere. Like we see a lot of examples that way. All you have to do is censor stuff. It's not even that you have to push propaganda necessarily. Like let's say even if you tell the truth, like you report facts, but you just omit the facts that are inconvenient, that would still curate a perspective, because you're leaving out all the negative and you're just reporting on the positive. So even if you're not lying, you're lying by omission, basically. And so that's a very powerful tool, because you're letting people come to their own conclusion. Like all you hear is positive things about, or like whatever, the stories they want you to hear. Again, even if they're true, even with no spin, it's like you're hearing those things, so that's what you react to, and you're not hearing the other side of it. So like all the other details they want you to omit, so it's kind of a curated, framed reality. So the problem is, again, that awareness. If you have awareness of the nature of and it makes it like, oh, that makes you fake, or you not genuine, or something like that, right? If you're aware of the nature of the process. But the process is the same. So it's kind of like, it's like the difference between playing dumb and being dumb, right? If you play dumb for other people, right, to appeal to a lowest common denominator, oh, that's fake, that's bad. But if you just are that way, then that's fine, right? So it's a kind of a selective standard. So it's the same thing with, so you are aware that appearances can be easily curated, manipulated, but yet you still take them seriously and value them, even though they're not credible and they don't have to be tied to reality. They can even be contrary to reality, right, as an overcompensation. So, what else did I say with this? Like, there's some, again, you're aware of the nature of the process with appearances and the senses, and so that allows you to recognize that, how easily they can be manipulated or curated. But again, it's your fault for being aware of that. You should just take it at face value, even though you know throughout history how much that's been manipulated, even though you can observe and be aware like how easily that can be manipulated. It's better just pretend that doesn't happen, and anybody who points it out, shoot the messenger, they're the issue, and they're fake, and they're deceptive, right? Like, again, if you point out, or you're aware of the artifice of a process, like, all it would take to deceive you is somebody to curate appearances a certain way, again, whether it be the media, whether it be government, whether it be just other people, but somehow, if you point that out, or you're aware of that, that's your fault, you're fake, you're like that, you're whatever, but again, so you can't be aware of that problem with the process. So that's the misframing of, again, being aware is the issue, not what you're being aware of. And then there's also something like, the senses, but also like social contrivance is the same way. I don't know. I feel like that was a pretty good start to the stream, though. Like, I got a lot of the points out that I was going to talk a little bit longer, but I kind of just breezed through it. So again, be weary of superficiality. You can easily be manipulated. Same thing with like social contrivance. Like, you're aware of the nature of the process and how it controls other people, and you don't really want to control them, but you're kind of forced to appeal to it anyway, because that's all the people respond to, and they're used to it. They're on rule by omission protocol, like, as I call it, which I won't explain again, but basically it means that like they are controlled that way. There's a line from The Matrix that actually I always use here, like, people will defend it because they're used to it, something like that, right? Even though these people are part of the Matrix, they'll defend it, right? Because they don't know any better, kind of. That's not exactly how he says it, but so the same thing here, like, you have to appeal to what people are controlled by, even if you don't want to control them, or even if you want to free them or make them aware of it. Because if you make them aware of it directly, then you're the enemy, even though they're having cognitive dissonance with the nature of the process, right? They'll blame it on you. That's one aspect. Again, I wish I remember that. I don't know if I have that episode up, if I had done one here, superficiality protest. I think I did. Let me see if it'll show up. Do an episode on artifice doesn't last, superficiality protest. That's what I forgot that I did that. Okay, so the thing is, let me try to get through this topic a little more. Like, the way that you're controlled versus being aware of it, you'd rather not think about it. So again, you're ruled by the sound and fury signifying nothing. Like, people would rather have some false certainty than right, but it's your fault, or that's projected to you versus them, versus people in general. It's like, it's your fault that you're aware of that. You would rather have somebody be falsely certain, even if the pitfalls of that process are still present. And everything becomes like that. It's like, just thinking in general, it's one of two things. Thinking is a sign that you're stupid, like, you're slow, to come to the same thing. Not that you're aware of the nature of the process versus the curated, contrived reality, that you could be aware of both, right? Be aware of the inherent reality versus the contrived response. And then you can choose for yourself, instead of being a mindless sheep whatever, collective mass. It's like thinking it either means you're dumb and you don't get it, or you're slow. Not that it is an absolute and you can be aware, self-actualized from an inherent base state, or it means that, you know, you basically it means that what the hell was it? Or it means that, oh, it's artificial, like you or have some incentive or something like that. Meanwhile, like, it's the same thing. In fact, it could be something of a better, higher caliber, like, you know, higher nature of the process, long form versus like some structure reduced. But that's what people respond to, and that's what they're controlled by, right? They'd rather have some like canned, you know, thing. That's why the machination process versus the supposed value of people, like, supposedly you value people, but then what people got turned into by corporations and our mass scale overextension is like this human function where like everything is canned phrases, like the same social contrivance, like subversive overcompensation. Like there's no identity to it. Oh, please and thank you and all these kind of things, and just trivial self-insistence and just like appeal to ego and just like you know, how are you, and all these kind of things. So it's like that element is what ruled people. So it's like when people pretend something, right? That element is what ruled people anyway. So they pretend we value people, but then we let them be reduced to this overextended mass collective, right, where everything is like assembly line, they're like human functions anyway. So now, oh, it wouldn't be that big of a deal to have self-checkout or robots doing the job, because we allowed that same process to occur in the first place, right? We were never looking for individuals. We were never valuing human life. We were overextending. We were preserving the stimuli acme flippantly. We were doing all that stuff already. We were allowing the overextension by corporations. So when you allowed human functions to be the norm, now it's no big deal to switch them out for robots, because that's basically what you got anyway, right? So you never really value people. They pretend to. We pretend to, oh, we value social interaction and this and that. Meanwhile, you go to Walmart and kill the mom and pop stores in your local area. Or meanwhile, you know, it's a pretense. It's a pretense that's used to reinforce anything, but it's not really what you value, evidently. Or like you can be aware of the nature of the process and appeal to it, but it's kind of like, let's say you don't want to control people by that, or let's say that you want to free people of it, like remove the need of self-governance. But it's kind of the way, the trappings of contrivance, right? People will define themselves and others by that which is only necessary to overcompensate for a contrivance state. So if you try to free them of it, or if it doesn't apply, then you no longer need it. Look what a stupid spot that, what the fuck? The cop pulled the guy over, and there's like a tree thing right in front of him, a fallen tree right in front of him. Yeah, don't even get me started on gas, the amount that I'm driving, but that can't be helped. And this vehicle has been through a lot, but I put in a lot of work into it actually, so it should be good. Actually, the last couple of days I haven't driven that far. It's just in general I'm going to be going places like, you know, I've stayed kind of around Albany. watch a movie in that one mall, but I don't even know really what. I rarely go to theaters as much as I used to review movies and stuff. And then when I do, it'll be something dumb, like, of all things, I go see Megan or something in the theater. Like, I don't know why. It was just an excuse, or because I have that thing with the perfectly symmetrical face of Allison Williams. I do have a good eye for that, like model scout mentality. So like you can pick out somebody's just photogenic and they kind of stand out, right? Her face just kind of stands out like that. Or she's got a good makeup artist or whatever, but I don't think that even has much relevance. Yeah, let's look at this concept of like the myopic framing of something. Right, like where truth doesn't matter. People are on RBO protocol, they're controlled by a certain thing, like obsession with stimuli acme, so that's used as the baseline even if it doesn't apply. So it doesn't matter. Oh, even if you're asexual or just don't care, it doesn't apply, you're not interested, or you have orgies, you're absolutist, either any of those things doesn't matter, right? Because everybody's ruled by the stimuli acme anyway. That's just how it is. So then that comes in the framing of it. Like, you try to curate reality to a certain thing, and then if it doesn't fit that reality, it can't be. This is where people have cognitive dissonance. Is like, it's not even that something's negative or whatever you want to attribute. It's that they're in this curated false absolute state where like, oh, there's only one way to do things, and it's being forced and pressured on them. And then something else presents itself. Oh, that something else cannot exist. It's not possible for something else to exist. And so what happens? That has to be projected. Oh no, it is the same thing. They just don't know any better. They're just not going about it the right way. We're just going to project that that's what they want anyway. Right? That's what they're doing anyway. That's what they value anyway. Or we'll somehow condemn it, even though the act of condemning it doesn't really make the point. It's similar to how religion does it. Like, God doesn't want the sins to happen, or, certain things to happen. But then as an all-powerful being, they still allow it to happen. So evidently, they're okay with it, right? That must be, or they just don't care. So the point is that it'll be the same thing. Oh, it's absolute, like the stimuli acme specification. Absolute. You could say a functional basis, you could say a preferred, but it's not absolute. But it'll be treated like absolute and then preconceived and projected even where it doesn't apply. That's the one character that it kind of is a spoiler for my own writing. I won't even say it. But it's like, it doesn't apply, but it doesn't matter that it doesn't apply. It'll be projected anyway because it's necessary to control and how people are already controlled. And then the way that people are, projected that way too is relevant because of the simple fact that fact that it'll be projected, preconceived, where it doesn't exist, because that's the only form of value that people know, right? Really what they're attacking isn't the individual then, it's really revealing how they're controlled, and all that they think about and all that they know is kind of like, it's the inability. They just lack the ability to do that thing. They just don't know any better. They just are going about it the wrong way, right? Something like that. Not that they just don't care, don't want it, doesn't apply, else, different measure that they have, different priority. Right, so nothing else can exist. The false duality is clear, but again, that's an unqualified assuming intent fallacy. And then the other issue is the fact that even when those other actions happen, like it's a false absolute once again. And if the preconceived projection, stuff like that, doesn't work, then people do other things anyway. So it's an absolute, like semi-acme specification, for example, but then people do other things. Like, okay, they could live a minimalist life, not care about sex, not worry about it, right? Or they could be absolutist, like orgies and, open relationships, stuff like that, nudist colony. Those both examples do exist, right? People can do them. They are possible, right? Some people do them. Those have to be condemned, and they're condemned on some weird basis of like, well, but the right way to do it is to specify the stimuli, which shows you right in doing that it's not absolute, but you're trying to project and force it on everybody uniformly, and so that's unnatural, creates a conflict of contrivance when you pretend something is absolute that isn't absolute, and then people might be very happy with doing that or at peace with doing it, but you're not at peace with your own controlled state where you're compelled to specify the stimuli. So what it means is, just you're not at peace, so you have to attack anything that's different, right? Because otherwise you might think, oh, maybe you want to do that yourself. Like I always use that example with celebrities. Oh, some Leonardo DiCaprio or somebody sleeping around with a bunch of people, and again, assuming it's all consensual and stuff like that. But just the idea of like having open relationships or being promiscuous or a player or whatever, that would be condemned. But it's kind of like, well, if you had the opportunity to do that, maybe you would want to do that too, but you just don't have the option. So it's a coping mechanism. Like, it's not that you don't have the means to do it, it's that you don't really want to do it. You're pretending like you don't want it just because you can't do it, right? It's kind of like, oh no, you don't want to be a billionaire. Money can't buy happiness, so I guess you're happy with less money. But you're only saying that because you don't have it. You could just be just as well with more money. Or, again, stimuli, oh, you don't want to sleep with a different supermodel every day. You want to be with your one wife and whatever. Like, there's a coping mechanism. It's not really a, credible thing. You're only saying it because you have to say it. Or because you're coping with the state that you're in, Freedom is not allowed, variance, so it goes into a normative appearance pretense basis, and that's kind of the purpose of social contrivance too. It's always just a lower form of the same thing, like thought, objectivity, curated through very controlled means to reinforce also a curated structured state. So even functionalism is an incredible basis there, and the reason why is because it'll be some pretense of functionalism, right? Like, okay, you have for productivity, but then it's not mass productivity, it's lowest common denominator, overextension, half mass functionalism. So it's not, like a clear functional basis, productive or not, or a harm basis. But like a lot of things that people do, they're harmless, but they're still condemned because they're too free and don't fit in the uniform thing. And triggers people with cognitive dissonance with being a half-mass trained animal, that anything free or variance has to be condemned, or, oh, they lack the ability to be this uniform way, like robots, even though they're not a robot and they're just doing something that people are capable of doing. So it's like this revisionist history of like, people are a certain way that a specific current modern society makes them, even though that's different than other societies around the world or throughout history. So it's not an absolute definition, but you kind of frame it as though it is. So like any deviation from this false absolute norm uniform state is negative, even if it's harmless, even if it's in its own way productive. Like that's why the idiosyncrasies of like, oh, this highly successful person or whatever is weird in these ways. Maybe it's not that they're weird, it's that those things that you consider weird are uncommon, but they're part of what makes them successful in the first place, versus what's normal is just a mediocrity, right? The mass number of people are just a certain way. Often not even choosing it, curated reality. That's the part that people don't really get. It's like, oh, normalcy, and that's a normal person. But your norms are set, right? They're not naturally occurring. What would be the norm? Okay, people are born in nature. How would normalcy be then? right? People are born in China or different, so there is no one set norm. And even within that, right, there's too many incentives at work. Your norms are set by the media, your norms are set by the government, your norms are set by subjective, other incentives and flaws and myopic things. So it's not absolute, is the point. And so one of the ways that we could do this is freedom variance is impossible. So people will have that weird pretense of functionalism, like, oh, in the what is it that people indignantly insist upon? Some norm, like, oh, that's normal or that's weird. Well, what does that really tell you, and what does that really say? Like, based on what? Just what they're familiar with, just what's common, what they're exposed to. None of that's actually a credible standard. Right? Something that's uncommon and abnormal could also be exceptional, or could, be better by the same standard, or, and then something that's normal could be flawed or mediocre, or it's just not absolute exclusive to everything else. It's not really based on anything. It's more like a collective mass just insisting upon themselves just to feel gratified. Like, it's not that we're just all mediocre, mindless sheep who are made to be that way by a contrivance that we're victims to. It's that, oh no, we take pride in that and we can relate to each other. We've been exposed to the same contrivance and influences, so that's so relatable. And if you're not, then, oh, that makes you bad, or that makes you arrogant, even though you're just recognizing human potential versus this limited, restrictive state that you're curated into, that you don't even choose, right? All the influences around you before you're old enough to think for yourself, and then you're falsely absolute defined by that. And that's just how you're controlled and labeled and stuff. Some of the elements that come into play there are basically it's just dumb, because I don't know how to even explain it. Everything is trained and curated, so the initial is valued. Like, oh, this person doing something without even having to think about it is somehow a good thing, because they're like curated robots, preconceived. It's like, oh, it came to be by them studying this in sales school for years. So if you were aware, like, oh, that's just a sales technique that they learned and studied, you'd be, oh, that's cynically motivated, and you might be weary. But then in practice, when they're doing it, you're okay with it. But you just don't want to be made aware of the nature of the process. It's kind of ironic, like if it's the opposite. You're like, oh, you lack the ability to do that, not that you don't want to do it or that you're not doing it. There's like, that's really what happens. The corporate kind of thing ruins everything for everybody. Is that you're so used to artifice and so controlled and trained by it, RBO protocol, that when you don't see it, you kind of crave it. Like, oh, you want the little lowest common denominator things, but you get something different, right? Or you get neutrality or truth or something. It's like, you want to be controlled by that, but what if somebody doesn't want to control you and they want to remove the need? And again, recognize human potential, but human potential and freedom cannot exist when there's so many people overextended, right, in a mass lowest common denominator state. So you falsely desire it, and then again, the ego is used to gratify that way. Even in a zero-sum process, it's again, there's a preconceived incentive. It's like you can't just. It would be like a competition, like what I call preying on something. And it's not an end goal that like we put up with contrivance for now, but let's try to remove the need and be free of it. That's the end goal. Instead, oh no, it's competing, like, oh, but I'm more useful in this contrivance state than you, so I deserve more things for it. And like that takes the selflessness and the minimalism of it. So everything's projected into the self. Right, that's how it has to be. People have to be selfish, and everything's projected non-based of self. Because if not, then that means that, people are selfish, and there's no basis to control or tell other people what to do then, especially there's no basis for authority because you would project it. So you would project it on some random individual for not socially contriving in a certain way, which you wouldn't do that to authority figures, again, carefully curated perceptions. And yeah, like thinking is the enemy, self-awareness and thinking. And it is the enemy of a human function, half-mass, false absolute state that requires constant overcompensation, reinforcement through externality. But it's not the fault of that state for requiring that. It's the fault of the random individual, Emperor, has no code fallacy, for not overcompensating for it. So it's your fault that you don't overcompensate for this flawed process or contrived process that's not at peace with itself. It's your fault for not overcompensating, not the fault of the process, not even saying it's bad, but it's not absolute exclusionary to everything else. And so, no basis to outwardly insist uniformly. There's this one funny thing that I saw. There's only 6 Walmarts in Vermont, the entire state of Vermont. So that means Vermont is like one of the least populated states or something very odd about it. That almost sounds like a made-up stat. There's like 6 Walmarts in like a 20-30 mile radius sometimes, like within just Syracuse, or just like they have 6 Walmarts alone in that area almost. So that's crazy. I didn't realize Vermont was that small. Not even landmass, it's decent, but populate, like we'll look up all kind of random facts about it. It's like 80% white or more or something. And it's like, I don't know, like what is it known for? What is New York even known for? Like you'll say the city, but I mean like, the Erie Canal, Niagara Falls, or like some great achievement. Like what is its crowning achievement? I don't know. But yeah, just remember the ego insistence basis, and the way that works is basically that like you would deliberately not place emphasis because you don't want to make it about you, and everything's about a standard and true value inherent. But it shows you people are subjective that way. Everything's selectively inclined to twist to a certain way to a benefit. And so the problem with that is it's not credible. So the one willing to take a step back and try to be objective is punished for it, like, oh, that's projected onto them, like their own uncertainty or lack of ability or some duplicity, versus the one who indignantly insists upon it is rewarded because they're somehow, again, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. People would rather have false certainty than uncertainty. accelerating uphill. I don't know, you can never tell, like, is it your car or is it that the roads are really this bad? That's what New York is known for, all these shitty roads, which with some of the weather in the winter and stuff I can kind of understand, but man, that's crazy. What's the minimalist solution to that? Oh, you could just walk. You don't need roads, but just use a horse. Just, you don't have to go anywhere, but you know, you're kind of forced to and spread out, and so population and the stimuli preservation is a big issue there. Sounds like a horse galloping sometimes. That's how bad these roads are. You're literally turning your car into a horse. That's why they call it horsepower. Like, it's so dumb. But no, like, even like humor is nothing more than cognitive dissonance I'm talking about, where like, you know, so you're aware of the nature of the process, but you still take it seriously. Right, so like, people want to be fooled or controlled by it. But what if you don't want to do that? Oh, you lack the ability to do it. Not that you could choose something different and you're responsible for it. But the problem is, you get into this like universally applicable thing. It's like social contrivance is a tool that's used to reinforce basically anything, no matter what it is. And you know, the value of people is used as a tool that way too. So for example, like, you know, oh, do this, be nice to other people, or do this in the name of, you know, whatever, something positive towards humans in general, but not as far as amalgam theory, and not, you know, so no matter what state you're in, you'll reinforce it. Oh, it's World War II Germany. You don't want to be the one who upsets the norm, even if that norm maybe deserves upsetting. You don't want to be the crazy one criticizing the time you live in. The time you live in is always absolute, don't you know? You look at history and you'll see that, oh, you would criticize, how could the Romans let Rome fall, or how could you follow the bread and circuses and stuff. You can always criticize the past, but you don't see it in your own when it's happening to you. But it's like, you know, you don't want to be the one to upset that false absolute norm, even though it's not absolute. And then you also don't want to be the one to, you don't want to be the one to, you know, point out the flaws, shoot the messenger, because people are content with the bread and circuses. There's even an intent not to preserve the stimuli, but people are selfish in that way too. You don't even sympathize with them. It's like, you preserve the stimuli flippantly, you know, create your own oppressors. So people are weak and lazy and controlled by their own selfishness. But even like the lazy part, you could say, well, you know, a minimalist ideation might seem lazy, but it's that you require less. So if you don't want it, so you wouldn't have kids, let's say, so you're not struggling to feed them, or you wouldn't, you know, require a lot. You could just be at peace. So that's somehow negative or entitled versus all the excesses and overcompensations. So everything is a reaction to thought. So it doesn't really matter the form it takes. You're aware of the larger process versus some incentive to compete over some hierarchical contrivance state. Right, and it's like, you're aware everything is the same process versus being a slave to the initial perception, some sort of weird conscious contrivance, because you're not aware of that, and so you're controlled by externality, myopic, you know, aspects. And then the other thing is the fact that, so again, none of this is like ego incentive or, you know, hierarchical, like you compete for something. It just is, right? You're just seeing the objective reality despite that. And then the other thing is, so you can be aware of the larger process, and that allows you to, you know, counteract it, potentially be free of it. again, people are concerned in the initial level of like coping with their contrivance state or reinforcing it instead of being free of it. Removing, finality, removing the need. So you'll always just reinforce it forever then. You have that, again, hierarchical competition thing, and then you have I don't know, like if you're aware of the process, that it wouldn't work or apply or wouldn't matter. Again, there's like that was a very bad turn. I wasn't paying attention. That guy behind me was kind of cool though. Okay, so that was a good topic. I feel like I forgot one major thing I was trying to say, but I just can't remember what it was. Towards the end here, like the hierarchy of competition with that, but also you're not aware of the larger process, you're a slave to externality. Like certain things are glorified because they're easier to control. That's the only reason why. Right? You could just do the same thing, remove the need for people, like remove the need for something like, again, relieving the semiotic meaning yourself that invalidates other people, or again, even probably favoritism or machination process, like all these things that, you don't need people then anymore because otherwise you can, again, like a robot that cooks and cleans for you and whatever, does everything for you. People will still be glorified in that way, like this human-centered thing that you rely on them, right, that they want to be relied on, is kind of like stuff sometimes. Creates. Like, this is like an ad. I don't know what the thing I did. Still, even again, the minimalist is projected in that weird way to control them. How do you control the absolutist? You say doing the same thing that we value and that we do, but doing it too much, that's selfish or excessive somehow. And do the same thing, but just in a half-assed state such that you're controlled by a inherent, tendency like the semiotic meaning. Like specifying it. So you condemn like, it's good, but if you do it too much, it's bad. By the same measure, that's just a way to control people. And make them gratified in a half-assed controlled state. And then, but the minimalists, how do you control the minimalists? They don't even want anything. Now you have to project that, they do want it, or somehow lack the ability to get it, right? Some labels like that. Or even like they lack the ability, or they I don't know, you would say something like, what would you project about the minimalists to try to control them? Like that they're somehow that's lazy or selfish, even though again they want nothing, or it's somehow like or again, it'll be projected somehow like you need the permission of ego or something to do it. Like, I don't know, like you lack the ability to do it, or it's somehow like you trying to prove something to be a contrarian, not that you're at peace with less.